Okay, so the time is now 1:10. Should we get started with the last session of the day? Um, so let me share my screen. So we have a panel discussion. My name is Stephen Cho. I'm currently an assistant professor in the Department of Statistics and Data Science at SMU in Dallas, Texas. It's my honor to be the moderator for today's panel discussion. The theme for today is AI in workplace. And fortunately, we have three very great panelists in our session. First, we have Professor Jen Tang. She is currently, well, she received her PhD in business administration from the University of Washington. She is currently an assistant professor at the Cox School of Business at SMU. She's my colleague, sort of. Her research concerns the interplay between technology, human behavior, and their societal impact. She is also the creator of a web app called Chat SSRN. I want to briefly share that with you. So you might wonder, what is this? This is a app. You can kind of understand this as a very powerful search engine for literature reviews in exploration of the SSRN abstracts. So if you are interested, you can find her website by clicking the link, and you will be able to try this out. And our second panelist is Noah Giansiracusa. He received his PhD in mathematics from Brown University. He's currently an associate professor in mathematical sciences at Bethany University, and also a visiting scholar at Harvard. He's the author of a book titled "How Algorithms Create and Prevent Fake News." Um, he has multiple appearances on CNN Live and BBC Radio, so he is quite a celebrity here. And last but not least, we have Professor Gail Burrill. She has extensive teaching experience in secondary education. She is currently a mathematics specialist in a program in mathematics education at Michigan State University. She is also a co-director of the Institute of Advanced Studies International Seminar in the Park City Mathematics Institute. She is also authors for numbers of books and articles on statistics and mathematics education. She has spoken nationally and internationally on issues in teaching and learning mathematics. So this is a quick background and introduction about our three panelists. So how this session will go is I personally prepare some questions for each of the panelists, and I think that's where we can start. Um, and the audience are welcome to type your questions in the Q&A session in the chat box, and we can, of course, give audience opportunities to participate in the discussion. So for the time being, why don't we start with Jane? So Jane, the first question that I want to ask and to sort of start up this discussion is that as a creator of this chat SSRN, do you anticipate any significant changes in how businesses and industry leaders will leverage academic literatures for strategic decision making in the coming years? What are some of your insights?
Sure, Stephen, thanks for the invite. It's great to see everyone here. I think chat SSRN is not so much directly related to business, but in business school and also in my personal experience, I think AI or large language model is going to make a lot of changes in the business world. I would like to give you two examples. So the first example is a collaboration between me and an online grocery store in Europe. So right now I'm helping them to use large language model for personalized coupon recommendation. for their customers. And we are leveraging the traditional recommendation systems together with large language models to provide personalized coupon. And I think I think there are many tools that are now being quickly developed to accomplish those business tasks. And from my experience, if we just use simple prompt engineering techniques like chain of thought, role playing, the performance of the personalized coupon, it doesn't perform so well. So what we do is we leverage some of their historical data, their historical coupons, and the effectiveness of different coupons to do an alignment. So after doing alignment, we're basically training the LLM to be an expert in coupon generation. So that way, the coupon performance was a lot better. And we use LLM not only for marketing purposes to generate coupons, we can also use it to test the effectiveness of coupons. We use it as agents. We create agents to do surveys, and we can greatly lower the cost of performing marketing research or surveys, and we can train those agents to represent different demographic information, different demographics. I think this is one example of how AI or LLM is changing the way people make business decisions. Another example is a study which is performed by BCG consultants. So they have categorized different tasks, consulting tasks, into two categories: AI capable, and another category is tasks that are out of the scope for AI. And they tried to give the consultants AI assistants with the access to large language model, and they find that large language model can help consultants with lower performance or below average performance much better than consultants whose performance was above average, but they help both of them. However, they also find that for the tasks that are not the expertise of AI or large language models, having this AI presence actually lower the performance of those consultants if these tasks are not an expertise of the AIs. So these findings, I think both of those examples highlight how the business world is embracing LLMs. And based on the platform or the application I developed, ChatSSRN, we also performed a user study where we designed two information tasks. The first task is to ask the subjects to collect literature, collect papers, 10 papers related to data privacy. And then the second task is ask them to leverage those papers to generate a speech for as an assignment for their PhD courses, and they need to come up with the topic and also the bullet points supported by the evidence from the papers. So we tried to give them different features like recommended keywords. When they are interacting with ChatSSR, we give them recommended keywords. Or we also tried to give them recommended prompts to help them generate the next prompt. And we find that sometimes when these extra features, like recommended prompts, when they don't perform well, it actually make the subject's performance worse. This is consistent with the finding from BCG consultants. So I think the business world is definitely making use of LLMs, but there is still a lot of challenge regarding the evaluation and when the LLM or large language models do not perform well. Yeah, those are my thoughts about how LLM is changing the business world.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for your response. This is very detailed, and I like your two examples. So I guess a follow-up example would be, so well, well, again, you give us very nice examples on how business taking advantage of AI, and those are all very convenient for the customers. So now with the rising AI tools to make research or business applications more accessible and efficient, what are some of the specific skills and knowledges area that do you believe are essential for researchers to develop in order to efficiently, better take advantage of such tools?
Do you want me to go first and then they can chime in whenever
Yeah,
they
yeah,
want?
you can go first, and then I will ask Noah and Gail to weigh in.
Okay. Um, I think as a researcher, learning large language model, I think a lot of researchers are already using large language model for like editing purposes, for grammar checking. Um, there's a tool, it's an Chrome extension. It's called Overleaf Copilot. A friend of mine developed this tool. Um, so I told him it's a little, so there are several features of this Overleaf Copilot. One of them is auto-completion, which I think is risky and dangerous. And I told him to remove this feature. You can do auto-completion for code generation. Do auto-completion for manuscript is very dangerous. It could, I mean, people don't have to adopt it. It will pop up a window to show you, what ChatGPT will complete this paragraph with if you put it in ChatGPT, but you don't have to adopt it. But I told the developer, I said, it's very risky. You can bias people when they see this. But I don't want to talk about this feature. They have another feature, which is editing feature. So when they had their initial version, the editing feature was a very basic feature with the prompt saying that this is a scientific research. Okay, just edit it to make it more clear, no grammar mistake and stuff like that. And then the developer told me he got some feedback from his users asking for additional features. Some of them want the editing to help them streamline, and of them want them to help them to rewrite it in a more scientific way. And I personally, I have a friend who told me that he used to ask his wife to read his review report to make sure that it doesn't sound harsh. It's respectful because he couldn't tell by himself. Now, and later he told me Grammarly has a feature that can help you to rewrite in a more friendly tone. So he thought that friendly would be helpful because he doesn't want to write very harsh reports. So so my friend, who's the developer, he actually adopted some of those opinions. And now the Overleaf Copilot allows you to customize your prompt for editing purposes. So you can edit it in different ways. So when you are writing a novel, when you are writing a syllabus, when you are writing different things, you may need a different prompt. So as a researcher, I think it's good to know what is the purpose of your write up and how you can leverage those tools to help you. But at the same time, I think it's very important to be compliant to all the policies of the journals um, and also be responsible when you are using these tools. I think a lot of the journals are still not publishing their guidelines. For some of them have, they said you can use it for editing, but make sure what the AI has regenerated is checked by you to make sure that's what you mean. But some of the journals, they said, still are unclear about their policy and they're actively discussing. So when you're using those tools, just be very, very careful and responsible, making sure that you are not being biased by those tools. Um, so that's one skill that I think is helpful to know those tools. And another thing is for social research, actually many researchers are starting to use large language model to train agents to help them with simulations. They train agents to help them with I saw a paper that's recently published that used large language model for causal inference. So there are different applications that use large language models for more creative tasks. Um, some of those tasks, I would say, like they are still in the developing stage, definitely not as stable as the statistical tools that we used to use. But I think for me, it's good to keep an open eye on all these developments and advancements. So other things that I could think of, I think it's less for research, but more for teaching. I know that many instructors have started to use large language model to generate AI bots to help the students. They work as TAs, and there are many prompts made available by many professors to generate those TA-like bots to help students answer questions. I think that's another thing that I personally would be interested in exploring. But I'm sure other panelists have more opinion and comments about that. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for your response. So, Noah and Gail, do you have any suggestions, opinions that you want to weigh in based on Jen's response?
Go for it, Noah.
Could you remind me the context? Unfortunately, I was a few minutes late. I was hoping to do this panel while my 2-year-old is napping, and of course, right as we're starting, he started yelling, so I had to go up and pick him up. So I had a little chaos in the house back here, but if you remind me the prompt, I can jump in.
Yeah, no problem. No problem. So the short question is, I was asking Jen. Well, she's the creator of this Chat SSRN, which is a very nice, powerful search engine for literature reviews. So I was asking if she can think of some specific skills and knowledges that are essential for researchers to take those kind of AI tools further.
I see. Yeah, I mean, so I was a little distracted with my 2-year-old when Jane was talking, so I apologize if I'm repeating what you said. But just, I think broadly speaking, I'm finding a lot of with my students and even with myself with research that a lot of the general principles that go into information literacy are still very valid, that we often want to find very new ways of thinking about processing information with these AI tools. But I think it really goes back to the basics, which is we have to think critically and really evaluate the sources. But that's where it becomes a bit more challenging, or at least it takes more active thought, because traditionally you go to the library and you pick up a book and it's obvious what the source is. And then we adjusted to Google and internet search where the source is a web page. And, it took some time. Remember in the early years when students weren't allowed to use Google and web sources as, cite them in essays. And now, when does anyone ever set foot in a library, right? We all start at least with Google and then go to the library later on, I think, once we find the sources. So it took time to kind of adjust, but the key really was recognizing what are reliable sources and not. And of course, the internet has everything, right? Some things are very reputable and some are not. And now as we're moving into the more AI RAG, for instance, retrieval augmented search type of thing. So basically you point an AI at documents and asked it to synthesize those. It's just very crucial to know what sources the AI is drawing from. I think it's very difficult to get anything insightful from the training data. These large language models are trained on such vast corpuses that it's basically hopeless to think that, to look at the training data and say, oh, that's reliable versus not. They just train with everything they can. So I think we just have to forget that that's going to be how we're going to assess the quality of the information. But with a RAG type of framework and variants of that, we can force it to tell us what documents did it synthesize this information from. And then we can go that extra step and say, okay, once I get a sense of this information, can I go back and personally check those sources, be them web pages or PDFs or books, or wherever they are, and just kind of verify. So I think a lot of it comes down to using these AI tools as almost like a first pass to survey the landscape. But then once you know where things are, to really go back and check them in a traditional way. I think for me and for my students and colleagues, that seems to be working well. It's just use it as a tool to get you to these sources. But at the end of the day, I don't think we can ever trust anything produced by AI rather than the source itself. But the AI can help us find the sources, just as a web search can help you find sources, or Wikipedia articles. In fact, I'm working on a book right now, and I'm finding Wikipedia very, very helpful. But every time, what I find most helpful are the references. I'll read a paragraph and think, oh, that's fantastic. And then I go to the references and I find, okay, well, that, Wikipedia pointed me in the right direction. It got me to those sources, and it summarized what's in there, right? If I just looked at the references, it'd be very difficult to know if it has what I'm looking for. So I'm finding Wikipedia very helpful as a quick way to point me towards resources. And I think AI plays a very similar role, or can play that role.
Okay. So I come at this from a very different perspective. So I'm basically spend my life thinking about teaching and learning, both math and statistics. So that's kind of where I look, I center what I'm doing. And so to me, the things you're both exactly on with this careful, critical reading of what the AI produces, and also the idea of the evolution as we grow. So if you think about what's happened over the years with our use with technology, not just AI, but even graphing technology, and how that has been or not been accepted in classrooms, again, which is where my focus is, in classrooms. And even though it can do wonderful things, there's still a lot of hesitation in letting students actually have access to some of this technology. And we've learned over the years to kind of adapt and figure out how to make that technology effective. So I think that the AI is in that same space. It's another step in a direction that we have to figure out how we're going to navigate as we think about, in my role, what happens in the teaching and learning part. I do think, so one of my own things that I've discovered is it's really important for me when I'm talking about what AI can do is to keep a timestamp, because what the AI might be able to do in 2 months ago, it might not do the same way now, because as it collects more information, then it comes out and it says things slightly differently or puts things together in a slightly different way. And so I think keeping track of what time you're actually getting the information off of the AI is an important thing. There was a setup team headed by Smith in an article from 2023 that talked about stewardship. I really think that that's what we need to do as part of our education system, is help people understand the need to attend to privacy and security and ethical aspects. And so to think about how is this accessible to whom? How is it interoperability happens? What's the reusability? How do all these things interact? How is the findability? And what's our responsibility in kind of stewarding along people's learning to appreciate and yet be careful about what AI is doing. One of the things that I kind of blindly did is I fed in to an AI, I fed in a student paper and asked it to respond, what it would do with that student paper. And I didn't actually realize at the time that student paper now could become part of the background that the AI was using, and it could appear in another space or form. But I never actually got permission from the student to actually feed their paper into the AI. So it's raising all sorts of questions about what's ethical to do and what's not to do. And so I think we have to be really careful from the education perspective. And maybe I'll get a chance to say this later, but I'll say it now. The other thing that I'm really worried about in education is, just as with the graphing technology and handheld calculators, and now we have, things like Desmos and things that are going on. But many of those advances are or were, and sometimes still are, only available to certain students, usually more privileged. They have more education in their backgrounds and more financial and intellectual support. That's happening again with AI in schools. So the places where AI is involved in the school world are often the better schools, the private schools, the schools that focus on science and technology. in the inner city schools, the teachers, the people are reluctant to let kids into there. They don't have the tools and the equipment. They don't have the time to learn it. So I'm really worried that this whole AI business can actually increase the gap that exists between kids who have and who don't have. So that when they get into the business world or another space, they will be on an equal footing. And I'm worried about that. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your response. So, sounds like, well, right, just to quickly recap, based on the responses, we need to be careful and be responsible, both on the user's end. We need to be able to determine what's right and what's not wrong. But on the other hand, I think based on the response, the user of the AI also need to be responsible and careful on what we feed to train the AI. So this brings me to the next question for Noah. Based on your experience in AI roles in media, how do you can you share your thoughts on how AI might evolve and to address critical information and combat misinformation? So bad training data, or how do you, generally speaking, how do you account or address those?
Yeah, it's a great question. So first of all, as you can see, the nap for the 2-year-old did not happen, so he's here with me, but that's okay. So far, he's calm. But yeah, so I think a lot of it is just being realistic about what AI is capable of and will be capable of. I think we need to move past this idea that the world and the internet in particular is just filled with information. Some of it's true, some of it's false. And the job of fact checkers is to separate those. The job of AI is to separate those. I think we run into real limitations when we just think of information as either true or false. I think so much of what we deal with on the internet and more broadly, it's less, I mean, there's certainly a lot of misinformation and disinformation. Misinformation generally is the word people use when something is just not true versus disinformation when it's actively meant to deceive. So there's plenty of both of those online. But a lot of what's online is also just different interpretations and coloring of events. So to give a really concrete example, imagine during the COVID pandemic, a news article comes out that says someone got the COVID vaccine and then 5 minutes later died of a heart attack. If you think of the millions of people that were getting vaccinated, statistically, this is the right audience to say this to, statistically, that probably did happen to someone. So it would not be misinformation to publish an article saying that someone died right after getting the COVID shot. It's not false, it's not misinformation, but it's very much slanted to portray a certain view, right, that the vaccine is dangerous. So this is just to give one concrete example. The more I've delved into this, because I kind of entered the field thinking of this more like black and white, there's true statements and false statements, and we just need to try to get AI better at separating them, almost like a binary classification problem. And the more I've got into it, the more I see that just doesn't work, that so much of what we see is it's colored and it's gray zones between true and false, and it's really the perspective that the information is portrayed. So I think there is progress, and there will continue to be progress with various techniques within AI and in particular LLMs. Right now they hallucinate. There are, very prone to misinformation issues. I think those will improve over time. But when you talk about the kind of asymptotics of that, I don't see that asymptoting to perfection. I see that as sort of asymptoting to like maybe human level, right? Where humans are somewhat reliable and somewhat not reliable. So I can see the AI more approaching human level reliability. Maybe it's there already. I don't really know. But I don't see it ever becoming a 100% precise truth machine that can just read a statement and know if it's true or not, because the world is so complicated and so much of that takes, contextual awareness, current events, nuance, cultural sensitivity. The world is just so complicated that I don't think AI will ever really reach that. But again, I don't think that's the goal. I think information itself is more complicated than just true or false. So that's just to kind of set this up to say I've learned a lot coming to this, and my black and white view of information and misinformation has evolved over time to realize it's all more subtle. And to say that we just need to be realistic. AI is not going to solve these problems because these problems are more complicated and they're more deeply rooted. So I think we need to focus more on how can we get the AI to help provide reliable information to people, to help people find sources that they can trust and that don't just confirm their worldview, but maybe expose them to new information. How can we get the AI systems to hallucinate less, even if we'll never eliminate it? So I think it's part of a broader picture of kind of information literacy that AI is a component of. But I think one of the most dangerous things we can do, and unfortunately some tech companies lean into this, is to just kind of pretend like, oh yeah, AI hallucinates now, but eventually we'll fix it and it'll just be 100% truthful. I don't think that's going to happen. And we're already seeing culture wars, right? Where Elon Musk's Grok chatbot is supposedly more truthful, which really means right-leaning. He complains that Google's one is more liberal and censorial. And just as humans, debate politics and cultural things, it's not just about true and false. We have politics, we argue. I think already we're seeing this with chatbots, that we're not just arguing about which is more truthful and which is more, has fewer hallucinations and misinformation, but we're just realizing information can be colored in so many different ways, and chatbots are part of the same challenges that we run into in politics and debates and every other setting. So the short version of that answer is, let's not idealize what AI can do and recognize that it just fits into what we do as humans, which is process information through our very human experiences. If we view AI as part of that, I think we can use it effectively. If we think it's a magic truth-telling machine, or at least it will be a few years down the road, I think that's very dangerous.
Thank you. Gail and Jen, do you want to add to Noah's response? Okay, so my next question would be for Gail. You mentioned that one of your biggest concern is that AI could possibly increase the gap in education depending on who has access to it and who has not. So I guess a similar question to think about is to how to balance personal AI-driven technology and traditional teaching in a classroom. So for those who have no access or minimum access to, some of the newer AI tools, what can we do to how can we do it in a traditional teaching components to lessen the gap in a classroom setting?
I don't know. I haven't thought about how AI can lessen the gap. So I guess, so AI can make up lessons. The lessons are made up, and sometimes they're pretty good, but they're made up absent the teacher's voice about who the students are and what they might need and how the learning might work better for them. And so the AI doesn't know that. The AI doesn't know the individual things, and the teacher has to take what the AI kind of comes up with and mold that into something that would be useful for those students in the teacher's classroom. There are some ways that AI can be very useful. A friend of mine is actually collecting many different samples of the way students approach problems. And they're feeding this into an AI, and they're attempting to use that to design research that will help us better then design experiences for students that will enable them to overcome some of the challenges and hurdles that they have. So this is part of a huge big project that they've been working on, and they're developing curriculum for middle school kids. And it's a really interesting thing that they're attempting to do, and I'm hoping that it works, because that would give us much better ways to get insight into how students think about it. I don't know if any of you have ever graded or been involved at all in the delivery and grading end of a college board advanced placement course. But advanced placement, one of the really nice things about being a reader for advanced placement is you literally get to see hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of student responses to the same question. And that gives you kind of an AI perspective. I mean, I have all of these things now to draw on, to step back and say, what did I learn from looking across, hundreds and hundreds of responses to this one particular question? And that's a really useful thing because it informs your own teaching. It informs your own way about how you look at things. So in that sense, AI has the potential to become that kind of a support for teachers. It also has the potential, if it's misused, to become just a lesson getter. So sometimes teachers really like just going online and grabbing a lesson. So instead of taking a textbook, they can just say, okay, AI, whatever they're trying to do, give me 25 practice questions on, the t-test or whatever. And so the AI will do that. And depending on which AI you use, and from my perspective, most of the students that I have and the teachers are not going to get what you pay for. They're going to be the kind of AI where the first version is free. You get 20 questions a month free. I don't know, is that Julius that does that? They're all have their kind of limitations. And when you go beyond the limitations, so again, that's an equity issue. But the teachers are going to say, okay, just produce this for me, and the AI is going to produce it. There's no real attempt at building a coherent trajectory, understanding that what AI produces for this lesson, how does that connect to the next lesson? That people that develop curriculum are really careful of thinking about. So like, I don't know if you guys have ever looked at the role of regression in a stat course. So where does regression come in an intro stat course? It can come a lot of places depending upon the way the designers have thought about this and what they want the students to take away and when they want the students to be able to use something. But it's very different depending upon the perspective of how that curriculum is structured and what the designer or the instructor wants to do with it. Well, without careful thinking, all these ideas can just be piled individually, one on top of each other. And then there's no connections and there's no linking, and then there's no knowledge that takes place. So we have to be really careful in the education world that we don't let AI become one of those. Every day it generates a new set of lessons. Because I'm kind of agreeing with Noah. I don't think AI is ever going to be able to say, well, this is the right trajectory for developing an intro stat course, because I don't think there is a right trajectory. It consists of, making sure that the parts fit together in a meaningful way, but there's a lot of different ways you can put those parts together. And so I'm worried that people will think that AI has now done it, and that's the only way it can be. And so again, it has to do with helping people see the bigger picture, and that AI is not the complete answer getter any more than the graphing technology was the complete answer getter. So I think, again, we just have to be really careful and think through the ways that we encourage people to use this new tool that we have. And like all tools, it's going to have things that maybe are really useful, but things that are not so useful as well.
Thank you. Thank you for your response. I definitely agree with a lot of points that you said. And I do sometimes find using AI will actually make my course preparation more difficult, especially when, you give independent topics where the orders does not necessarily make sense. I need to, really jump in and organize it in a way that I like. Noah and Jen, do you have anything that you want to add to Gail's opinion?
Jane, do you want to go?
So yeah, I can go. I want to go back to the question that Stephen was asking, whether AI can actually make people's access to educational resources more equal. I think there are tools that are AI-based tools that I really like. For example, IXL. So my son, he's a 5th grader, and he is using IXL. It has some AI-based features. So it will give you questions that's appropriate for your level. So after you complete certain number of questions, it will give you the questions that are not too hard for you and not too easy for you. And progressively, you can use those tools to improve yourself without, working on boring questions. So I think the access to IXL should be relatively cheap. I mean, the cost should be relatively, it should be pretty accessible. And I wonder whether this type of tool can actually equalize people's resources or access to educational resources.
Jen, did you say the name of the AI is IXL?
IXL. It's just a. Go ahead, Gail.
Okay, so I want to respond. Okay, so first of all, according to the College Board, oh no, I think it's NCES, the Center for Educational Statistics, 95% of the high school seniors have a computer in their home. So 5% do not. They don't have a computer. They didn't probe to find out what happens if you have a computer and 5 kids, or if it's a computer and it's 25 years old. They didn't ask those kinds of questions. But that means that 5 kids out of every 100 do not have access to technology and at home. And that means when you think about the millions of children we have, 5 out of 100 is a lot of kids. So there are a lot of kids who are not ever going to have the technology like your son has. There's a lot of kids whose parents don't, that is not a part of how they think about it. Their culture doesn't encourage that kind of use of money to support that. And so those kids will just never have that opportunity. And so that's like really, really scares me. It's not just the financial cost. It's also the kind of willingness and the knowing that this is something important that needs to be done. And it's not there for some people. And it's hard for us to figure out how to get that into the kids that really need and can benefit from that. And so basically what might be happening in your son's classroom is that your son is actually already moving ahead of at least some small percentage of kids in that room, because he has this access to this and you are there to support him in his using of it. And then the other thing that I have to throw in is, so learning, coming to know, doesn't happen on an individual basis. So the Japanese do not like very small classes. And the reason they don't like small classes is because you miss the diversity of thinking. You want different people's perspectives. You want to find out how different people are processing things, because collectively, you often have a better way of, well, I mean, that's what happened with the COVID vaccine. Collectively, our scientists did a much better job than any individual person in their room. So just sitting to learn by going through the machine, even though the machine responds to you, it's only one machine with one perspective from whatever it got trained on. It can't respond in the same way that a classroom of vibrant discussion, where one kid is saying, no, I don't believe that, or I don't understand how come this works, or if you tried another number, what would happen? And so those experiences are vital to processing information. It's a rare kid who doesn't need that. And there are students like that. There are some, then maybe you guys were those students, maybe you were the ones that just, thought, oh my God, this is great. I just think I ran into this guy yesterday who he became a math major because he had an awesome geometry book, and he saw fractals in the back of the book, and he read the whole book because he was fascinated. He's a rare beast. That is not happening to most kids, that they would do that, So they need this conversation, the discussion, the interaction. So this AI stuff is good for practicing. It's good for supporting. It should be for all kids, but it doesn't replace the kind of stimulus that comes from having in conversations with your peers about what things are good to know and what things aren't. So I'm sorry, I had to push back.
I just, sorry, want to add on a little bit too. So I agree with, both panelists made interesting points, and I just want to add on a little bit, which is, I think when we think about the diversity of learning types among our students, exactly as Gail was saying, it's very rare, and I think increasingly rare these days, for a kid or a student of any age to want to just sit down and read a book. Unfortunately, that is becoming a bit antiquated. So as Gail was saying, a lot of students learn much better in a more conversational format. And yes, ideally that's with other humans, be it the instructor, family members, or peers. But I think there are a number of students that are just not learning well by passively sitting in a classroom, and even the more like flipped classroom and active learning just doesn't always work for all instructors or all students. I had one very, very bright student who would come to lecture and sit there and pay attention, but she would go home and kind of talk with a chatbot, I don't know if it's ChatGPT or one of these, and kind of ask it about the topics that we discussed in class, almost like a tutor, but it wasn't, trained to be a tutor, but just to make it more back and forth. And she said the information wasn't always reliable, but she would ask it a question a few different ways. And usually she could tell, like if no matter how she asked it, she got the same answer, it was pretty safe. And if she got different answers based on different prompts, then she knew, okay, I'm not getting the right answer, I need to dig deeper. But I think it is important to recognize that lecture only reaches a certain type of student. Books only reach a certain type of student. Chatting, even with a computer, might be a way of reaching a broader student base. And I agree, it doesn't replace humans. And, we shouldn't even think about trying. As Lakshmi Chowdhury in the audience says, AI can be an assistant, not an instructor. I fully agree. So I think when I teach a class of 10 students, well, that never happens. When I teach a class of 20 students, I actually do a pretty good job of getting to know them and their names and their learning styles and talk to them. Once I reach 30 students, unfortunately, I just can't do that. I lose track of their names. I don't really get an individual sense of who they are. And most of my teaching is 35 students. So it's over this threshold where I don't have that strong one-on-one basis. So I do think a chatbot could be a way of giving students some of that, an approximation. I won't say it's that, but an approximation to that more individualized learning, which I wish I could. In an ideal scenario, and parts of the world do this, like in England, they have a more tutorial system where you have a tutor and you have just a few students and they study something very focused in that way. I think that has some merits and maybe some downsides, I'm sure. But anyway, this is just to say, we have to take this larger view that some things we're doing are working well for some students and other things are not. So that goes into both what Jane was saying, that there are tools that are helpful for a lot of students, and into what Gail was saying, that some students that are coming out ahead are a very rare type, and we have to think about how we can help the students that are struggling. But exactly as Gail said, just thinking we can sprinkle magic AI dust on everything and that'll lift all, boats in the rising tide is also naive, because not everyone has access to these tools. Not everyone knows how to use them effectively. And there's a big danger. I think one of the most helpful things I find with AI is thinking of it in relation to social media. I don't think social media is destroying the world, and I also don't think it's saving the world. I think it's both. So I think AI is destined to have a similar fate. And specifically, what I think will happen with education is there are some students that will benefit tremendously from these types of tools where they'll get more attention, individual learning, personalization. I think there's a lot of students that are going to lean into them too heavily and use them to write their assignments, as they're already doing, but also just kind of learn too dependently and never even try to read a book or go to lecture or even search the web, and just kind of become addicted to the chatbot as their vehicle for information, which I think has many downsides. So just as social media has helped connect a lot of people, I've met a lot of really amazing colleagues and friends and all kinds of people through social media, but it also is fueling a lot of addiction problems, and especially for teenagers, it's been very challenging. I think AI is similar. It will help a lot of people and it will hurt a lot of people, and we just need to figure out how to strike that balance and make sure it's not hurting the people that society is already most neglecting. And I think that's what Gail was really hitting at. it's not just that it's who access to AI is uneven, it's very specifically correlated with an unevenness that is already, etched into society. So in other words, those who already have the least resources will continue to be so. So we have to find a way to turn that around, right? To say, okay, let's take those that are most vulnerable and most left behind. How can we use AI and focus to help, or not use AI, whatever it ends up being, but how can we focus and help them the most?
When I was thinking about this talk and the questions, I had this kind of a vision of, okay, here's this class or a student, and your child goes home, and now you have 5 AIs, different ones, all talking to your student. So the student is having this conversation with all these different AIs so they can get different perspectives on things. It's kind of a horrific thing to imagine, but it's not impossible anymore. That it could be that this small group of kids in one of my classes each group could have an AI that they're having a discussion with. So I've got 3 kids and an AI, and they're all having a discussion about something that I'm trying to get them to understand. I mean, I think we can do stuff like that and work towards it. We just have to be sensible about what we're advantaging and how we're doing that. But I think it's fascinating to think about.
Yeah, I also want to add another example. So one of my friends, he actually, they developed exactly the bots that Gail, you were mentioning. It's for group project. So every group is assigned to a specific thread, like a separate chatbot. And the purpose is that their discussion will not be disclosed to the other groups. So every group has their own design of their assignment, and the chatbot will help this group, 4 or 5 kids, and only this group. And they have been using that tool on a course with over 200 students, and they compared students who have access to that group discussion assistant and students who don't have access. And the students who have access to that group discussion assistant got higher grades in the end of the semester. Although it's still at a developing stage, but I think that can easily become true. What you envisioned can easily become true.
Yeah, that sounds like a very impactful tool.
And that would help some of those kids who are disenfranchised as well. At least it would give them some opportunity to interact with this kind of technology.
Yes. Okay, so for the interest of time, let me ask one last question, and that's this question is for all of you. So looking into the future of AI in research, what skills should the upcoming researchers prioritize to stay relevant in the AI enhanced research landscape?
Wait, sorry, so specifically for people who want to research in AI?
Yeah, or use AI in research.
So I can start. I want to talk about how I think my agenda for AI related research would be. So right now I'm looking into agents. There has been a lot of studies about agents and how, because if you use ChatGPT, you were given instruction in a natural language, and GPT is responding to you also in natural language. But GPT is not calling a specific function to perform some to perform a function to complete a task. So agents can enable large language model to perform more complicated tasks. One example is that business can have one agent for product search, and this agent will be able to query their database to provide more information about products. Another agent can be responsible for return, and that agent knows specifically the policy, the return policy, and will always and can process the return by calling the function to issue a return. Another agent could be handling refund and so on and so forth. And those agents can actually interact with each other, and you can hand off the task to another agent. So I think related to business research in AI, I'm interested in learning more about the capabilities of agents. And sometimes, what if an agent doesn't perform? What if there are different designs? For example, all the agents can be listening to the customer simultaneously, or one agent can be listening to the customer. And if the agent considers himself not the appropriate agent, he can hand off to another agent. So there are different architectures of those agent collaboration. So that's something that I'm interested in doing.
Thank you. And Noah, do you have anything that you want to add, or Gail?
Yeah, I think one thing to keep in mind is that the AI research space just moves so quickly, right? There's just, I don't know how people keep up or even come close to keeping up. There's just thousands of papers every day. In my corner of math, there's maybe 50 papers a day. And I have no chance of reading them, but I'll skim those 50, just the titles of those 50 papers. I'll pick maybe 5 to read the abstract and maybe 1 to actually skim per day or maybe every other day. And I feel like, okay, I have some, statistical sample of what's happening in my research field. But when it comes to AI, it's just orders of magnitude more research happening, more people, more papers. It's absolutely overwhelming. So I think one piece of advice I try to offer my students, at least, is to really recognize that the fundamentals are not changing. It's the way we're building, putting the fundamentals together and how we're leveraging them that it's really novel. So very concretely, so much of what's happening in AI still has its roots in the basic principle of supervised learning. Even things like ChatGPT are part of the training process is self-supervised learning, but just understanding the basic idea of what is supervised learning, right? That you have some labeled data and you're trying to fit a curve or learn a dependence between your predictors and your target variable. Understanding exactly what you're doing, what that means to do supervised learning, how you measure things like overfitting. That helps you understand self-supervised learning, which helps you understand a big chunk of how these AIs are trained. Another component that I think is important and growing with importance is reinforcement learning, which is another part of training these chatbots, right? The reinforcement from human feedback. So I think really recognizing that we may see things like, I don't know, random forest and naive Bayes and SVM as very classical 1990s style stuff. And now that's completely out. And now we're all doing AI, deep learning. But just recognizing that all of those are rooted in supervised learning, and really deeply understanding what supervised learning is and how it works will carry you very far. And it gives you a foundation. I mean, it may sound kind of simple, like how much is there to it, but I really think spending a lot of time on these foundational topics will make it so much easier to keep up with the currents of change. It's not like every new paper is a completely new idea that you just have to start from scratch. It's more that they're building on top of things. So I think to help people keep up with that onslaught of research, really try to see what is this building? What's the new, if you think of it like Legos, what's the foundation it was built on, and what's that extra Lego they're adding on top, rather than trying to see each paper as like a whole new thing. It's still very hard, and I don't know how people do it, but that's my advice. Don't forget the basics.
So I agree. I'm totally, I'm just all about teaching and learning. So I'm just trying to figure out what the AI can do in helping us think about teaching and learning. And from the research perspective, I mean, I just still think that understanding that there's some core ideas that are important in research. You don't abandon those core ideas. It's kind of like data science. You don't abandon some statistical ideas because you fell in love with data science. You still have to hang on to some of those core statistical ideas. Where did the data come from? Who generated them? Why did they generate them? You still have to hang on to those core ideas. So you have to hang on to these core ideas that are important, and then figure out, like Noah said, how AI can add on or enhance those basic things. And maybe they'll make some old stuff that we used to think was important. Maybe they'll make those not so important anymore. Even in research, they might make them not so important. Because that happens, you know, we don't do square root algorithms anymore. Stuff gets old and gets left behind. But you have to be careful about what you throw out. But I do think you have to say, all right, here's opportunities, and how can we, in the, you know, hanging on to our core principles, how can we make this grow and help everything that we're trying to do, at least for where I am in education, and for Jane, she's talking about business. How can we make these things so much better by using AI?
Great. Thank you all for the nice response. And we have a few minutes left. I would like to open floor to the audience. And I can see that under the Q&A session, we do have a question. So let me read out the question. With respect to education, you hear a lot of stories about students using LLM to complete assignments and a lot of isolated negative incidents. But do we have any ongoing studies or large surveys that involve educators and the role they see those AI tools playing in their students' education? What are your thoughts on this question?
I mean, I suspect both Jane and Gail have a better sense than me, but I'll just point out a little warning that this is extremely difficult. I pretty much guarantee by the time you conduct such a study and have it go through peer review and have it published, the day it's out, whatever tool you studied is completely out of date and your study is of limited value. The tools are just changing so quickly. So you can't really keep up. Plus, education is such a longitudinal phenomenon, right? So we can measure students' test scores, but that gets so contaminated, right? Maybe you'll find a pattern that students who study with LMs do better on tests when they can use LMs. Maybe they do worse on tests when you can't use LMs, but it's very difficult to disentangle. Are they actually becoming more successful at a career in a world where technology changes, where new tools come in? So basically, I'm going to punt the question and just say it's a wonderful question, but it's extremely hard to answer for many, many reasons. So I think there probably are some studies and some partial information, but it's also hopelessly difficult to really.
So you've actually pinpointed a huge problem with research, is that there's such a lag between the study and its final vetting to make it legitimate. So because you don't really want studies that haven't been reviewed by peer reviews. And so you really do need to have some kind of time built in, but that time just compounds. And so then by the time the studies come out, like you said, they're late. But I am hearing personal stories, and a couple of well, like Amy, I think it's Amy Ellison Slade, they did a nice story about what they did in their classrooms. So I'm hearing individual stories, and they wrote this up and was published in some stat journal, that what happened in their own classroom. They're not mega big studies. This is what we did with, you know, AI, and this is how the students responded, and this is what we learned. And so they're not going to give you that kind of hard and fast evidence that, you know, the kind of control, and these aren't those kind of studies. But if we can amass enough case studies to help us get a better understanding from individual people who are actually doing things in their classrooms, maybe that's what we need to do. Because you're right, it's just going too fast, and we're too slow.
Yeah, I agree with both Gail and Noah. I think this is super hard because appropriate use of those large language models or agents or AI could be helpful, but we never know whether they used it in the appropriate way. And it's very hard to even define what is the appropriate way. So I'm not aware of any ongoing study or large surveys that are collecting this information. I think that would be valuable. I know that there are some professors who are publicizing their prompt to generate a TA as an agent. I think so at my university, when you are teaching a course, you can choose 3 levels of access to LLM. You can choose no access to LLM appropriate or access with certain policies. You have to adhere to those policies, and all the third level is you can have all the access to those tools. I think for different courses, it's really different. So I have one course that's about optimization. I don't want them to use any of those tools. I want them to think through. Those are the fundamentals. You have to learn how to set up your objective function, and this is the basics. So I don't want them to use any AI. But I have another course about web analytics, where people can be very creative. They can create web applications. So for business students who don't really have a lot of programming background, having access to AI can actually help them because they can generate those business ideas, and AI can help them with coding. So it really depends on the course and what you are trying to obtain the students are trying to obtain in the course. So yeah, short answer is I don't know a perfect way to do it.
Okay. Do we have any other questions from the audience? I don't see any. Okay, so in that case, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for participating in today's event. This will be the end of this year's mini symposium, and we do plan to host another mini symposium next year. The format will be similar. The time would be likely the first Saturday of November. So we'll be sure to send out announcements. And again, thank you everyone for participating in today's event. Thank you. I believe the events will eventually be posted on our sessions YouTube channel. So I look forward to see some of you again next year. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Steven. Bye.